Good evening,
Hello.
everybody. Welcome to another live broadcast of the Coaches Corner, SCA Coaches Corner. Tonight, we're opening a big can of worms topic, and that is failure. This is going to be the first of at least 2 episodes. We may be even pulling on the thread of the sweater and coming out with more, just because failure is such a broad topic. It's a deep topic, and it covers so much of the experience of learning SCA fighting, or really anything. It's also a very personal topic. So we've got a number of people on, including myself, that are going to share some of their personal stories of failure, how they've dealt with it, the sort of failures that they've encountered. So we're going to kind of get started. We want to welcome Sir Guillaume, Her Royal Highness Nessa, and Duke Sean tonight as our coaches. And I believe Duke Ragnavldr will be joining us shortly as well. So, and thank you, Sir Sadb. She's producing the show tonight, so she's behind the scenes. Thank you very much for doing that for us, Sadb. Kind of to get started, just the topic of failure. It's something that everybody has dealt with as a fighter, and I will tell you that we've all dealt with an immeasurable amount of failure. I remember starting out. I was physically clumsy, not adept. I was young. I was 15 years old, really haven't even grown in my body yet, but I had a real passion to learn SCA fighting. And so initially, my feelings on it were, I'm just starting something new. I'm going to fail. It's no big deal. It was no real pressure. And what I found out as I learned more and I started getting at least a little proficiency, I knew what I could do in terms of blocking, moving, striking, and whatnot. I said, okay, I'm starting to get this down. And then I failed. And then it started to hit me. Like, I know better than this. I'm doing this wrong. I started to become hard on myself. So what was an enjoyable thing when I started, because I accepted everything, I was going to have a ton of failure. It then became more of almost something that ate away at me. And so we're going to talk a lot about different perspectives on failure. We're going to get into some specifics, person to person. We're going to really cover that. So thank you for joining us. If you have any comments, we certainly welcome them. Any questions, we're going to try to deal with those as well. Just know that we've all dealt with a ton of failure. It's just beyond measure how many times we failed, how often we failed, how drastically we failed, and spectacularly we failed. So don't feel alone that you may be dealing with struggling advancing, things that you try that you just can't get to work, opponents that give you no end of trouble, and you can't seem to get past them. We've all been through it many, many, many times. And our goal is to try to help you get some good perspective on how to be constructive with using that failure to progress. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Sean. What have you got on the subject of failure?
Well, very much like Tristan, I started fighting very early. I was a teenager as well, and I had done pel work for a couple of years before I even got foot on the fighting field, and I thought I was shit hot, and the more you get into it, you learn pretty quickly that it's going to take some work to actually be good at this. And I can say that in those earliest years, especially as a teenager, most of what I felt as failure was entirely not exceeding my expectations. I had high expectations, especially having some early success, as I'm sure Tristan did as well. You have a little bit of early success and that feels good. And you're like, okay, this is what it should feel like all the time. And then suddenly it's not. And so, yeah, I had my expectations of how, who I should be beating, how many fights I should be winning, what tournaments I should be winning, that sort of stuff. I mean, it was all, that was the hardest part for me, is not meeting and exceeding those expectations. And honestly, that was something that that affected me until literally the day I won Coronet list. That was the first Royal list that I won, and that was the day that I was finally able to accept victory conditions. which is something I talk about all the time, and that is why is because up until that point, I was so wrapped up in what I should be doing, all the coulda, woulda, shoulda, what I should have already done by now, and not meeting those expectations. And it was when I was finally able to let go of that I was able to really start to succeed.
All right, so we've got a number of other guests on too. We've got Guillaume and Her Highness Nessa. I guess we talked a little before the show about kind of which order would make the most sense. And a lot of times when I know people look at knights and royal peers and they go, I just can't relate to you struggling with failure. You've probably won countless tournaments. You've competed, at high levels, and maybe you haven't won crown yet, but I'm so far, I'm just in the beginning or intermediate stage. I think that's probably some of the most relatable stuff. So maybe Nessa, you could explain a little bit of your perspective on failure.
Sure. I actually started fighting in the SCA at the same time my husband started fighting in the CA, but took some time off, kids, another sport. And when I came back, I fought not my natural hand, which was lefty, which gave me the comfort of I'm not where I would be if I came back fighting right-handed. It alleviated some of that. I'm not failing because I'm doing this in my not natural state, and after surgeries and injuries. So as I wasn't feeling, I was doing something different, and that worked for a while until I started learning some of the skills and fighting some people, and failures start to hit real fast for me. And it hasn't really quite ended yet. It's something I'm still in the process of figuring out how to deal with. My forearm, since I'm fighting lefty now, got tagged a lot at the beginning. And every time it gets tagged now, it is a failure in my mind. And I still haven't figured out how to stop seeing it that way. My husband and I talk a bunch. I see failures more than I see my successes, and it's a detriment. And I'm progressing towards ways of trying to deal with that, but it's still an issue I struggle with. My leg's the same way. Being lefty, that leg is wide open. It's going to get hit. And every time it does, and I also have the failure of not wearing leg armor. That's different.
That's a dangerous combination.
Your leg's getting hit. Let's not wear leg armor. So yeah, no, I just bought leg armor, used it at Golf Wars for the first time. So there's a step in the right direction, but still it's one of those step-by-step things that I'm learning to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you brought up something really great in there that I think people always look to the horizon, like where is my goal? And that is that I won't be dealing with failure anymore. News flash. You will never stop dealing with failure. Never, never, ever. And if that is the hope, or as like Sean, I like the way Sean put this, it was my expectation. If it is your expectation that failure will become not an issue for you, that's a bad expectation to have, because it now that the nature of your failure will shift and change. The failures themselves will probably shift and change, but the fact that you feel that you're failing or you're noticing you're failing, that will not change. That will always be consistent.
The steps I'm taking with my forearm is I do a really good job of protecting it, and I'm still changing things and learning things. Mm-hmm. But also the phrase of I have to say to myself sometimes is not to put down my opponent's success. They figured out the thing, and I should not be upset that they figured it out.
Excellent point. Yeah. Yeah, give your opponent the credit that's due.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a fair point we had talked about in the pre-show, is that just because you lost the bout doesn't mean that it was necessarily a failure on anything that you executed. You can do everything perfectly and still lose because you're working against an opponent who's also trying to win. So that opportunity is there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that is consistent across martial arts and the self-defense realm. You can do everything right and still lose. And that can be a hard concept to rationalize, because generally our mindset is, if we are vanquished in a fight, if we lose a fight, we think it has to be due to a mistake that I made. And often it is. Most times there is something you missed, something didn't get executed correctly, a mistake was made, something wasn't noticed. Almost always you can go through and find that. But not all, it's not never I should say it's sometimes you can still do everything correctly or the way that you've been trained to do it. And it was right according to the choice, but it ends in a bad outcome or an outcome that you did not want or expect. And that, I think, comes down to once you introduce a live opponent, there is a factor there, an X factor that is in the mix. And so, to me, if you walk away from a fight having lost, you can say, all right, I could have done that better. You could say, yes, there was a failure there, but really, and this is where everything that I've learned from Sean is just gold, is just audit. What was it I should have done? Or do an analysis. Don't beat yourself up and say, oh my God, I suck. I'm awful. This is horrible. Why am I doing this? It's okay.
I feel called out.
Turn it into that training lesson. And if you need somebody's help to do it for the analysis part, get their help. Because maybe you won't be able to figure it out because there's one fighter you've never seen, and that's you, unless you watch a lot of video of yourself. Then you can get that outside perspective that you just can't have when you're the one in the helmet. Sean, maybe you could elaborate on that some?
Yeah, I mean, the failure is kind of a starting point for my entire training methodology. We, as Nessa kind of alluded to, we learn more from our failures than we do our successes. And that's why failure is so valuable to me. I don't see it as a problem. I see it as a starting point. I see it as a critical part of the training process. And I just look at any kind of failure as isolating deficiencies, right? You've pointed out something that is deficient in your fight, and now you can use that to start training out that deficiency, and hopefully to have less failure in that particular portion of your fight. And that just, that's a cyclical process where you just keep eliminating deficiencies. But we need to have that failure in order to find out where we need to go from there.
Yeah, we have somebody put a post out of a comment. Chris said that youth are not exposed to failure. In the past, failure was used as a teaching tool. I think that exactly what Sean was saying is that the failure really is the catalyst. It's the thing that sponsors you to adjust your training or to focus on eliminating that deficiency. And without failure to start from, you will not really have any training. You're just out there wandering around doing whatever it is you want to, whatever it is you feel like you should be doing. And of course, because of the very nature of our sport, you will get negative feedback. You will experience failure. There's really no way around that. We can't craft the experience of new fighters to eliminate failure from the experience at all.
Well, and there's a limit to which you can improve on something that you're already doing well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you take something that you're doing poorly, the amount of improvement that you get off of that is like exponentially better than, like, I'm doing this one thing well, so I'm just going to keep doing this one thing well, right? I'm going to keep getting better at this. Like, well, how much better at that one thing can you get? Whereas you can take so many other different portions of the fight that have massive deficiencies, and in the aggregate, when you make even small improvements on those greater deficiencies, and that makes you a better fighter as a whole, right? But if you're working on this one thing that you do well and you keep trying to do that better, you're ignoring the entirety of the rest of your fight that is deficient, like far more deficient than this one thing that you're doing well. And the consequences of that are like you might do this one thing well, but that's it. You're a one-trick pony. That's all you have.
Nessa, you had something to respond with.
It's not necessarily respond, it's to add on. Like Sean was talking about, like doing small things to even see improvements in our things, and sometimes those are really hard to see because we see the failure so much. I know I had a really hard time seeing improvements in blocking my leg because my leg was still getting hit. but I'm not seeing the times I block it, the times I actually succeed in it not getting hit or move to be out of the way of the shot. I'm not noticing those because I'm just, every time I get hit, well, I'm not, that it's not working. It's not, I'm terrible at this still. So like, I think when we look at our fights, looking back at our fights, noticing, just looking for the things we're doing right, period. Not looking at how we did it, how we could have done better, things like that. But I did this right, I did that right. Certainly is starting to help me when I look at my videos, even though it's still really hard not to, but my leg is out there. But nope, I stepped. I made my leg fly. Like, are positive things. It's just sometimes really hard to notice the small things. But they're there. Those small successes are there. They're just, sometimes the failure just seems so blinding.
So Sean and I have a very similar philosophy here in that when I'm training myself, when I'm training my squire, when I'm working with anyone who I'm coaching, what I'm typically looking at is what is it that needs improvement? What is it that we can improve on? Where's, as you said, where's the deficiency? And so my approach in my self-analysis is that in a lot of ways I take my successes for granted. It's not that I disregard them. I accept them, but I accept them and quickly move on and focus on where I need to work. And so it gives an impression of focusing on the failure and not acknowledging the success. And Nessa, thank you for sharing that. It's a good insight in looking into the pausing to actually notice your successes and not fixate on the failures, but also be able to look at where you're able to improve and be kind to yourself in that process of, yes, I am doing things correctly, and that's okay. There are other areas that I can do better. And so I think it's a really good opportunity to be able to build on that by acknowledging the successes, accepting them, and focusing on the things that you failed at that you could improve on.
You know, I wanted to jump in with something real quick here, and that
Sure.
is a sort of a tangible tip for people. And I know we've seen some comments even this last week on the discussion group asking for what do we do if we have want to learn about fighting and we're in a distant area, we don't have access to knights, we don't have access to experienced fighters, we want to get started, or that's how I came up when I started out. I was in an area we didn't have a lot of mentoring, we didn't have a big skill pool or even accessible skill pools. It was pretty small. So I developed this just to help myself, because when I saw all my failures and I started listing them, the list was too long, and I'd be looking at going to a practice like, how am I going to work on all this stuff? It's just too much. And what I thought was helpful is just pick the top one or two. That's the only thing you need to worry about at your next practice. Don't try to fix everything. Just go through, if you can even look at it without help. If you can get help, great, absolutely do it. But even if you can't, pick the things you think are the most important and just prioritize them. Even if you get the order a little bit wrong, is fine, but at least let yourself focus on just one or two things rather than trying to fix everything at once. Comments on that one or the next topic?
It's one of my favorite things to tell like super new fighters is to pick one thing you want to work on first, because this is all super overwhelming when you're brand new. Like I have to learn this, I have to learn blocks, I have to learn footwork. Like, it's all super overwhelming, and I just pick one thing that's exciting you right now and work on that. Like, so that way it's not just super overwhelming, and we're setting them up to succeed at least in one thing first, and then they feel good and they want to do the next thing. But welcome, Ragnavldr.
Yes, welcome, Ragnavldr.
Thank you.
Yeah, and when I recall when I started out, I'd see other fighters. Almost everybody was more experienced than I was, even though we didn't have any knights in our area. But we had a few people that had been fighting for several years, but no one really knew how to teach. But I could see for a couple things. One is they seemed to be generally competent, whereas I wasn't. I was clumsy. Not physically talented or athletically gifted. Seemed to struggle with just about everything. But I looked at them and I thought, well, they're working on their own couple of things here and there. Usually they would choose a few things that they wanted to develop. But I felt like I just had this overwhelming list. And the thing I wanted to point out with that is I think everybody looks and sees, well, everybody else is doing much better. Why am I struggling with failure so much more than everybody else? And I wanted to just kind of dispel that myth. Is it may not look like other people are dealing with as much failure as you are, but that's an illusion. They are. They just maybe don't show it, or they don't verbalize or explain, how much they are frustrated with their own fighting, or that they are overwhelmed with their own list of deficiencies that they need to correct in their fighting. Yeah.
Or they're struggling with something different.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe they're struggling with something you're not just struggling with.
Yeah, like Nessa said, you start to focus on one thing, and that becomes what you're looking at all the time. So you look at somebody else, and it's like, God, their footwork, I'm trying to get my footwork right, and they're doing this so well, and I got to work so hard. Then you miss the fact that they're doing poorly with something else that they're working on. You just don't know.
It can be hard to sift information through our own perception.
Yeah.
Choose what to embrace, what to notice, what to make note of, and then what to ignore.
I think one of the other challenges we face here is a bit of selection bias for our own failures. You fight the same people at practice all the time. They know the things that you do. They're going to capitalize on the things they know that you do, and so it seems amplified because you're getting hit the same ways all the time. And you go out of the area and fight somebody else, and you find out that no, actually you're a better fighter than you think you are, but the people around you just know you well enough to be able to capitalize on it.
Unbelt means here's a lot of I have more experience, so I will be doing this to you. What was it? I fought His Majesty Morgan from Aidenvelt, yes, during Gulf Wars, and I had just learned to block that different way to block my leg, and I was getting success with it, and all of a sudden he's hitting my leg all the time, and he said to me, "It's my job to take what you learned and pick it apart so that you can make it better," and that helped, because there I was getting legged all the time again, and I'm getting frustrated, and he's like, "No, I'm doing this on purpose, even if you just learned it yesterday." So. Like, it's one of those, like I have to remember sometimes when I'm fighting somebody, even if I'm doing well in a skill, in lower or around my same skill level, somebody who's been fighting for 30 years is going to know something I don't. And it's okay to accept that. Even if I do better than them in something else, I could do better than His Grace Sean on one particular thing, and that's okay. And I could look at him and be like, he has all this experience. When I was fighting my husband during COVID, it was me and him outside. He was beating me all the time. I was crying every time, and I still came back. And he keeps saying it, and he keeps coming back. He's like, I want to get better. I want to be as good as you. And he's like, well, you can't right now. He's like, I'm a knight. You're just starting. I'm going to beat you. And it was just like, shut up.
Well, I'd like to kind of piggyback on that thought a little bit. Something that we see, particularly at our practice. Our practice is a pretty top heavy practice, very much like the Roaring Ways practice. And as an unbelted fighter, when you're fighting Knights and Dukes, it's hard for you to see any kind of progress for yourself. So you keep seeing what you're doing as failure. You keep seeing that I'm not getting better because the one tangible metric that we have that tells us that we're getting better is winning more fights, right? And as an unbelted fighter, you don't realize that as you progress, we are putting out more effort to maintain a certain kill percentage, right? So you don't see that we are working harder to beat you, right? All you see is that you're not winning more fights, and so you see that as a failure because I'm not getting any better because I'm not beating Sean more, right? And you don't understand that you are progressing, and we have to work harder to maintain a certain kill percentage. And when you get out of that practice and you go out into the wild, you go out to a Gulf Wars, or you go out to the War of the Phoenix, or you go out to another shire in your kingdom, and you're just going to be murdering people because you have gotten that much better. And it's just really hard to again, I think Nessa was pointing out that you can't see it within yourself, right? You can't see your progress. You can't see the good that you're doing. You can't see the victories and the successes. We as Knights and Dukes, obviously we can see it, and we'll, pat you on the back and say, you're really doing better. But until you have some sort of tangible measurement to feel that and see it for yourself, it looks like failure. Nessa's not her head.
and having a knight say, you're doing really well. I can see your advancement since last year. I have to be on my guard. I have to really sharpen up if I fight you now, because if I don't, you're going to take me out. Hearing that often goes in one ear and out the other, because it doesn't have that tangible feel to it when you finally do get that success, when you finally do, beat that person, whether it's a knight or royal peer, or even just a more experienced person that has always beat you whenever you fight them, and then suddenly you do. That to me is that first tangible, measurement of, okay, that wasn't failure. This was the opposite. I succeeded where I've always failed before.
I think there are a lot of, what's the word you just used? Reinforcement of success that happened before that. Mm-hmm. But I think this goes back to one of our discussions before about changing victory conditions. If you have someone, and I think a lot of this conversation has a lot to do with not just our own failures, but helping the people we're teaching to recognize and deal with their own failures. And what I've been trying to make a point of myself in my efforts to be a better instructor is being aware of when somebody is doing well and pointing that out, but in a more specific way. It reminds me of, like, if you tell someone, wow, you look really good today. Okay, that's just an opinion. It doesn't mean anything. But if you tell someone your hair looks amazing today, or that outfit you put together today is really great, they're very specific things. So with a fighter, you can be very specific. I'm never beating you. I'm never beating you. No, you're not. But here's the specific things that I'm having to do, because here's the specific things you have been doing better. Now, remember when you fought so-and-so earlier and this happened? That happened because you have this skill now. So I've been trying to make that a point, to point those out, because that was an early thing. That was a recent thing that I've had to face just a few years ago. I was having difficulties, and I ended up having to go backwards and sort of relearn. And I was having a really hard time. And this was a big point in my fighting, when I probably had more failure than I've ever had. Every practice was rife with failure. And it wasn't the same things. I'd pick up a new thing and it would work, and the other stuff would fall apart. And it was getting infuriating. I was angry. And as I was chatting at Bronis at one practice, he said something that stuck in my head. And I knew he was right at the moment, because as soon as he said it, it made me angry. He was right.
That's a sure sign.
Yeah. And if people say things that aren't true, and you're like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. But like it or not, if it's true, it's the truth. And that was, he started it with making me, at the end of every practice, I could bitch about whatever I want and figure stuff out, but I had to start by listing 3 things at that practice that went well. And what I realized was I was focused so much on the failures, the daily failures, the thing I did that failed, or this thing worked, but all these other things failed, and I can't hold up I can't juggle all these balls. It's just driving me crazy. What I was doing was I was throwing everything out and trying to start over every time, when in reality, I was building a really strong foundation. And by throwing out everything, I threw out this good foundation, and I had to rebuild it every time. And it's ridiculous. One of the best ways that for me to deal with the failure was to recognize how each time I did these things, I was building a stronger and stronger base. And now when I look at it, when something fails, I look at it on top of that positive part of the picture as well. I'm doing all these things well. This thing failed. So how does that fit in with everything I'm doing well? Then I can make my change.
So, Ragnavldr, one of the things that we're looking at, especially with you having had some considerable success over your career, uh, what does failure look like for you these days?
Failure for me is defined two different ways. One is in fighting, and one is outside of fighting. Outside of fighting is a personal issue, and I struggle really hard with it. It has to do with upbringing and all kinds of that stuff. For whatever reason, probably, I'm going to say probably because of practice. And I don't mean just going to practice. I mean practicing, incorporating, recognizing failure and success has changed how it works for me in fighting. In fighting, I have come to relish failure. Oh, look at my background.
Yeah, nice.
Yay me. I've come to relish failure in fighting because of this big picture kind of view. The analogy that I've been using most recently is, if you imagine every skill, technique, tactic, whatever that you learn as a brick, and you're trying to build this big perfect wall, whatever the purpose of the wall is. So you start setting all these bricks in. The more skills, techniques, and tactics you learn, the more bricks you have, the bigger your wall gets, the stronger it gets. But as you do this, there are so many bricks. Sometimes some of them wear away. Sometimes as you build, there are spots where you forgot to put bricks. So you're missing skills, you're missing tactics, you're missing a technique. When I have a failure now, the failure to me is somebody finding one of those holes that I could not see myself. So I have taught myself that it has become a gift. If you hit me in a way that I am unfamiliar with, I immediately use that as an opportunity. Oh, they got a thing. I step back and I immediately take a few seconds to process. Why did that happen? That happened because this brick's missing. That brick wearing out, or however you want to describe the analogy. So that's how failure works now for me in fighting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads into something that we've been kind of circling around a little bit. Bronos had made a comment on it. Tristan had kind of alluded to it before. We got a whole panel of just a wide variety of skills. We got Nessa, who as an unbelted fighter is still trying to find her way. You got Guillaume as a relatively new knight who's trying to get better. Advancing in Crown, has been to Crown finals a couple of times now. Ragnavldr and myself, who had some considerable success. In those early phases, that failure, it is demoralizing early on. I think much more so than it is at the level of Ragnavldr and myself. But it comes in waves and it feels differently as you progress. And to Tristan's point earlier, where you look at these guys that have had some success and it's like, well, you don't fail, right? So you don't have to deal with this because you're more successful than you're not successful. And kind of the point that this has been getting me to is the reality of it is, if you can appreciate failure more than allowing it to demoralize you, then it becomes that tool that we know it to be. And again, it gets back in that training process. Tristan loves when I talk about embrace the suck, right? It's taking those failures and using those for good. And the reality is, as you get better, as you get to a place where me and Ragnavldr and Bronos are, you actually have to actively seek out failure, because if you don't go after that, Her Excellency Yolisha had mentioned in a comment, if you're not isolating, if you're not finding a deficiency in your fight, you're not looking in the right places, right? The better you get, the more difficult it is to find people who are going to exploit your failures and who are going to be able to isolate those deficiencies. And so, yeah, it's not only is it's not just a matter of, oh, you don't fail, so you don't know what this is like. It's like we have to like put ourselves in a position to fail. Like we have to seek out failure, because if we don't, we can't become better fighters. And I think that's kind of what Ragnavldr was talking about.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. More of those, in my building on my analogy, more of those bricks wear away when we don't seek failure, because we find we don't need them. Right. So you stop reinforcing those techniques and tactics because you're doing the thing that you do best against people you're used to doing it against. So you just don't need certain abilities, and you stop using them, and those bricks will fade away.
Yeah.
So you have to fight other people. You have to create those failure positions. I don't know if you guys, I apologize for being late. I had a family thing. I don't know if you guys talked about, or if I'm taking off on another tangent here, on whether we actually want to use the word fail for some of this stuff.
So I think to an extent what you're talking about and what Sean was describing is kind of looking at a comfort zone. And if you're staying in your comfort zone, you're not really going to improve. You can only go so far without pushing that boundary. And the higher your skill gains, the larger and larger that comfort zone becomes, and the further you have to go to push outside of it. And so from that perspective, it's finding that edge and finding what you don't know and seeking new knowledge and seeking the ability to grow your skills. And so I can see a perspective where you're not necessarily identifying that as failure so much as opportunity for growth.
Yes.
A point of a comfort zone is a while back I was fighting only knights because as Brados put it to me, they were safe. They knew how to fight. They wouldn't hurt me if on purpose or things like that. They were safe fights. And while they were knights, they were better than me. Getting out of my comfort zone to fight people around the same skill level me is also important. And I was having a hard time doing that because if I fight a knight, I'll fail. And the failure's fine because it's a knight. I could afford to fail because they are better than me. So the comfort zone of getting outside of that was also very difficult. And then seeing what that I needed the failure to move on was very hard. So.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great insight. I think I've seen a lot of newer fighters unwilling to fight knights because, oh, they're so good and I'm going to get beaten up. I said, there's nobody safer for you to fight than a knight. So, and it was, you nailed it, Nessa. That's exactly what I see.
You know,
Yeah,
it's interesting too that from the traditional martial arts side or any martial art that has, you know, actual live work, whether that's grappling, striking, what have you, it's a commonly known thing that beginners are the most dangerous people to practice with because they are out of control. They don't know their power. They're clumsy. I mean, most of the stuff that happens is not that they masterfully pull off some technique and zing you, you know, whether they succeed with their technique or they overdo it and they actually hurt somebody. But I think within the SCA, the same thing is true. You know, the more times you get hit below the knee or, you know, with something, you're just facing almost this whirling dervish chaos thing. What I found was when I was mid-level, when I fought knights or really experienced people, I would start to mirror how clean they fought. And I'm like, man, I'm fighting much better. And then I'd go fight somebody who was maybe not even my level, who was just really sloppy, but they felt, you know what, if I just throw the kitchen sink at Tristan, I'm going to take him out. And it was just this pure chaos thing. And in those fights, I'm like, why can I consistently do better against people that fight real clean, precise? And I struggle with lower experience level people that are just pure chaos. And to me, that almost threw my failure gauge off because, you know, I thought, well, these are two different skill levels. But what I realized is they're two different skill sets. It's one thing facing somebody who is a precise, deliberate fighter, and then one who is just going to throw the kitchen sink at you. And so failure, it wasn't just a single sliding scale along one spectrum. It had breadth and depth as well as length, you know, and it was kind of a wake up because I was like, I should be able to deal with this, you know, this crazy lunatic berserk guy. And and they throw enough at you, and it's so unpredictable because it's not disciplined, it's not precise. I had to gauge, okay, what was my failure? And the failure was not being prepared for that type of fight versus the technician. Does that make sense?
It makes good sense. What I'm hearing is it can help to have someone around you who can contextualize your failures. Somebody who can point that kind of thing out, just like you're saying, I'm failing over here, and in reality, well, I guess we're going to use the word failure. You're failing there, but having somebody else to help contextualize it, to help show you did, but this is why. This is the reason for that failure, and it's correctable, and here's a fix for it.
A way that, and I never thought about verbalizing it this way, but when I was facing a good technician, I felt like I was swimming. I was still breathing. I was getting through the water. My motions were smooth. When I was facing that berserker, I felt more like I was drowning. Like I was just scrambling, trying to get air as my head was sinking under the water, and I was fighting. I was trying to fight. Whereas when you're swimming, it's nice and smooth. Your motions are deliberate. You know what's going on. You can stay calm. It was a whole different realm. To me, it was like that different skill set part. Anyway, thoughts?
Do you think a lot of that was because you were mirroring?
Yes. After some retrospect, I realized, well, this came when I then sorted out, okay, I have a problem dealing with the berserker thing, because you can't really study it like you can study a proficient technical fighter,
because there's no sense to it.
It's chaos. There is no sense to it. There's no rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
And so what I realized is, okay, my first reaction, my gut reaction, was to mirror them, which was bad. So then I had to go, okay, that doesn't work. So now, you don't out chaos. How do you deal with chaos? You have to be disciplined. And that what I took from learning to fight with people that were technical, I'm like, now I realize why they're technical, because they've built a level of skill that I didn't have with being technically disciplined. That's how you apply that to that berserker. Is you have to, you don't join in their game, you don't mirror them. You have to be. That's where all of your stuff, all of your technique, your discipline really gets locked down and tested. And initially I failed the test. That's why I would call that failure. But it was a learning tool. And I love the idea that we just talked about, which was that failure is the fuel that creates the big bonfire from the little spark. And I think this is the reason why advanced fighters like and pursue the failure so much, is like, I want fuel to dump on my fire. I want that thing to be blazing.
And look at me trying to be less of a failure.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, well,
and we crave that fuel.
Yeah, and that kind of chaos that you're talking about, that's one of those things that I talk about all the time. It's, Bruce Lee's lesson of no form from form. Mm-hmm. That chaos that you have in the beginning, that's just no form.
Right.
So totally, as somebody who just has no idea what they're doing, and that formlessness, you have to understand, and that what you're talking about, those technicians, those people that have that technique and can rely on that technique later. That is where you develop that form, right? And then you release yourself from it so that it can just be. But yeah, that chaos is just that's just no form. And this also kind of gets to, something else you mentioned, Tristan, kind of gets back to a comment that Thorin had made a little while ago about, how to use failure in this case. So seeing it more as motivation or opportunity versus a reason to give up. And I think that's one of the key components about how to deal with failure in general is how, failure, even in our sport, failure is a fact. It is going to happen. So it's how you respond to it and what you do with it that makes all the difference. And yeah, if you can take this failure and you can look at it as an opportunity to learn something rather than, as Soren puts it, an opportunity to give up, right? I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, Nessa gave you a whole lot of credit for, slogging through the failure in these early years, because there's a lot of people that would have given up a long time ago.
Most
Because,
do.
yeah, most of them, right? I mean, Tristan, as having a dojo yourself, I mean, how many people, quit within the first three belts because they can't deal with that failure. It's so demoralizing, and it's so like it's such a problem. Whereas if you can see it as the tool that it can be, and you can use that to fuel your fight and to fuel your training and to direct your training, you can absolutely use it as a tool instead of allowing failure to like define you.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
Brownus
a whole
actually
identity
was
at this
listening
point,
and
so I don't
posted
know
up a
what's
great
going on with
question
that.
to
Sorry.
follow up on that, which is what to do about it.
Yeah.
And I think that what he posted there was, if I find myself in a place of constant failure feeling, what should I do? Firstly, realize everybody is in feeling constant failure. There is nobody that is not feeling failure bugging them or gnawing at them of, oh, I've done that better. I don't do this well enough. That we all have that in common. But what I've found is the most constructive is, firstly, write it down, describe and put pen to paper, describe exactly what your failure is or what you believe your failure is. And then if you don't have anybody to help you, certainly if you do, you get somebody to help you. But if you don't, start thinking about, how am I going to solve this problem? What am I going to do to try to take care of this and focus my training on improving this? Nessa was talking about, with her fighting, as she fights as a lefty, her left leg is exposed. Okay, well, try some things out. Figure out, try to solve the problem. View it as a solution you're trying to find. If your list is 20 items long, write them all out, but then just start going after the biggest ones first, the ones you think are the most obvious and the most problematic, or maybe even the one that bugs you the most. Just go after that one, but go after it.
And it doesn't have to be physical things too. It doesn't have to be I'm having a hard time blocking my leg. I went to Adult Swim and I found I had this huge confidence issue. I like, even confidence is a failure. I wasn't like, I had one, like I went into Adult Swim worried about something, and all of a sudden then I had one fight which my opponent thought was great, but I just all of a sudden was like, I'm terrible. I shouldn't be doing this. I don't belong on this list. Look at all these people doing great and having fun. I'm not having great. I'm not having fun. I'm not doing great. Why am I here? And it took the whole day to get my brain back into some kind of state. And like, writing down that you have a problem with confidence is fine. Like, a lot of us struggle with confidence at some point. And I think the failure that walks hand in hand with failure sometimes, that when we have our failures, all of a sudden now we're terrible, we suck. Like, don't deserve to do this. I don't deserve to be on the list with all these great people. I'm in this list of Flag Out Tristan, Sir Guillaume, Duke Sean, Duke Ragnavldr. I'm in an amazing list of coaches right now, and it helps my confidence a little bit. Like, knowing that I could be here and talking about this with you guys. But write down those mental things too.
So Nessa, I want to build on that a little bit, because you're describing what I was going to say in maybe fewer words. To put a title to it, is failure as a distraction. And we've talked about how demoralizing failure can be, and a reason to cause you to want to quit. But even not necessarily driving you to quit, it can become a distraction. And we're talking about getting hit in the leg. And every time you get hit in the leg, you think, oh, I got hit in the leg again. And that distracts you a little bit further from focusing on what you're trying to do in the fight. And so that repeated cycle of the failure happening, and this kind of goes to Brownus' comment as well, that constant notion of constant failure is sort of viewing failure in that distracting way of, you're focused on the failure instead of what you can do to learn from that failure, how you can build on that failure, and how you can turn that into something that's more positive, how you can learn to address it. And one of the things that we've touched on is failure on different scales. Failure can be as simple as missing a shot. You had an opening, you threw the shot, and you missed. If you dwell on that shot, you're going to be thinking about, oh, I missed that shot, and you're not going to be thinking about what's happening in the fight now. You're stuck on that moment. But if you look at that and say, oh, I missed that shot, but I know what I did to set it up, so I'll make sure that when I set it up again, I'll hit it this time. And so you give yourself another opportunity to build off of that and do something positive with it.
Can I just piggyback on that too?
Mhm.
So something that Guillaume's talking about there, I mean, you think about missing a shot and then you start dwelling on that. This is something we see a lot in tournaments. You get into a double elimination tournament, and there's a lot of fighters throughout their tournament career where you lose one fight and then you're out in the next round after that. And it's because you were dwelling on the fight that you lost right before. And one of the really hard things about tournament fighting is one of these things you have to get through is you lose that first fight in your double elimination list, and then being able to pick that back up and be able to get through your next fight. That's actually a pretty significant milestone in tournament combat. And that is a product of exactly what Guillaume was talking about, is you see this failure and you get stuck on the failure of the fight that you had in the last round, and that just kills the rest of your list. And it's being able to, again, how do we deal with failure? How do we acknowledge it but not dwell on it? And certainly in a tournament, the very next fight is not the time for you to be figuring out what you should have done in the last fight. This is the time you should be figuring out what you should be doing right now in this moment, in this fight that you're having here. And that last fight that you just had, you can look at that later and get back to it, but that is not the time.
Yeah. So firsthand experience with this in the last crown that I went out in the finals. I lost the first fight of the tournament. It was a pool tournament. I lost my first fight, and I knew the quality of the people that I was fighting, and I knew the quality of the people that were in the list. And so after losing that first fight, I looked at it and said, so I know there's other people that are going to do very well here, and I'm not going to lose a lot of fights. And so I didn't dwell on that fight. I looked at it and said, okay, there's no margin for error now. I have to be precise. I have to be on point. I need to focus on my fights as I'm going through. And so I used it as a reference point to refocus me on what I needed to do in the next fight. And as that fight was happening, be focused and in that moment instead of sticking with that fight, but just knowing that there isn't room to fail again, or I wouldn't be able to make it to the finals. So I think that's sort of a way that I've used that opportunity of, I've lost that fight. What do I do with that? I don't stick with it. I accept that I've lost it and say, okay, well, now I need to be better. I need to be more focused and get back to work.
And I think the video, so many people doing video now, putting out video, doing live streams, I think that's super important. One of the things I learned in roller derby was that jam is in the past. You have a new jam. And it's I brought that in for my fighting, but it's led me to forget my fights. Like, I don't remember them sometimes at all. Sometimes I'll remember key things. I'll remember feelings, mostly feeling frustrated, feelings like that. Those I tend to hold on to, and I'm trying to learn not to, but I tend to forget my fights, and I have to go back to video for seeing things. So like, it's just one of those things of forget the previous fight and exist in the fight you have now, but just being very careful about moving on to that next fight, because that's something I'm trying to balance at this time. I cannot stand to forget everything because I'll make the same mistake again. I have to remember some things, especially in a practice setting. A tournament is different, but like, again, I'm glad we're in a recording so we can go back and look at these things. It's just
so what I'm hearing from you guys is two really great ways to deal with the failures. One is choosing the time to fix it. Like Sean was talking about, if I fight and I have a failure, if it's in a tournament and it's the kind of failure that's going to impede the next fight, what I'm hearing from that example is make a note of that fight mentally or on paper for later. I have this issue. I'm going to deal with it, but I can't deal with it right now. I'm going to set it aside. The other is when you have the failure, we always talk about, you don't want to focus on it. You don't want to get stuck on it. What the failure does is, for me, I've learned the failure points to a solution. And that's the thing that I end up focusing on. That's what gets me by now. So when you have a failure, getting stuck on that, and that's, to be honest, that's the thing I had to practice. So as an example now, it's fast enough that if I get like doing pickups at practice kind of a thing, if I get hit and I don't think it should have happened, which is, all the time in my head, I step back and I take a few seconds. I think, okay, this is what happened. What was I doing and not doing? All right, this is the thing I was not using. So let's fix that now. And then I go on. I have the solution. I just wasn't using it. So I can make the correction immediately. That's where I've gotten to, but it's taken a lot of time to get to that. I like Sean's input about if you've got a thing that's really holding you, a failure that you don't have an answer for right now, then think about it later. And like Nessa said, if you can't remember it, maybe in between the fights, as soon as you got a chance and you step out of the list from the tournament, make a note, this was a problem in this fight. And then you're done. You've got it on paper, you can forget about it. Afterwards, you're disarming and you're sitting around the tables at post-rev. That's the time to pull that out and see what input people have, or whenever the time feels right to you. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's important that what you've narrowed down to over the years of experience is you've compressed your process into a pretty short turnaround from problem to solution.
Yes.
A lot of people, and I remember doing this too, and always had once I ran into my failure, I would log it in my head and be like, okay, now what do I need to do to fix it? And sometimes the process was a little different. Sometimes I needed to go seek out people that I knew could help me solve the problem. Other times I could come up with a plan and go to practice and try it out, kind of the trial and error method to sort out my solution. But I think the overall learning lesson is take that failure and make it part of the learning process and just view it as one component of the learning method, a crucial component that you cannot learn without that being there. But make it a process. Do not make it fuel to beat yourself up, to become depressed or angry, to let it just take you into frustration. I like the idea of viewing that failure, and really what's the blessing is you noticing that failure. You noticing the failure is the blessing, because then you can say, all right. Yeah, because a lot of people fail and they don't even notice it. I mean, then they don't, what do you do if you're failing? You don't even know that you're failing. But once you can notice it, and it doesn't take that much. Once you become aware of what you're trying to do, you'll notice something that, even if you don't get hit because of your failure, maybe you just missed an opportunity. I could have landed a shot there, but I didn't. Fight keeps going. It's not like you lost or anything like that. In the grand scheme of things, you may see it as a small failure, but you notice it as a failure. Now you have the constructive component needed to take the next step, which is to figure out the solution, then go apply it, and then integrate it so that it becomes that, like that brick that is reliable and strong. It's always there. You don't have to worry about it failing you or being absent, because you've made it a habit. And that's, I think, the cycle part. And when Sean did his first class back at Known World Rattan Symposium back, 150 years ago.
20 years ago.
That is one of the things that stood out to me that I took from his talk was this is all just a process. It is not an emotional one that you go through these spirals of depression and frustration and anger with yourself. And it's just, you get better because you set all that emotion stuff as much as you can aside and get down to business of improving yourself. And I think that was, it's just a great approach. And it is the method. So I think it's a positive thing. It's not negative at all.
No, it's not negative at all. Sean put it perfectly when he said it's neither positive or negative. Whether or not you failed is literally a fact. It has nothing to do with anything else. It's just a thing that happened. And you've got three choices. You can say, I play for fun and I do not care. Therefore, I know they're coming up. I don't care if I get better. I'm having a good time. And that's great. That's a choice. A choice that I had to deal with was the negative one, because failure meant being unsuccessful, being unable to achieve, and never having the things that I wanted from it. That's what failure meant. So I had to teach myself a new path for it. Failure had to mean something else. And it took time. Like Tristan pointed out, I've narrowed it down to fairly quick. So I only, depending on what it is, I need a very brief amount of time, a few seconds at most, to figure out what the thing was, make the correction, and move on, typically. Sometimes they're bigger and I have to go to somebody else, whatever. But what I find myself doing through these years is failure equals a new success. That's what it's come to equal in my head. Failure equals a new success. If I don't fail, I don't get the new success. That's the shortest answer I can give. And to get there, it took time. When I would fight at practices, I would have an engagement and win, loss, or whatever, and then I would over disengage on purpose so I could have a few seconds to really think about what happened, what went on there. And then after a set of passes, I'd sit and I'd think about it some more, and try to figure out. And pretty soon that got shorter and shorter. And now I can disengage sometimes for a second or two, and that's enough to analyze what happened, fix it, and move on. So I think the short answer for me is failure now in fighting. Failure equals new successes. That's what I get. So I almost get excited by it. When somebody pulls something off, they were kind enough to point out a thing that's a failure, because a failure means a success.
That's a great way to put it.
I want to jump on something that Ragnavldr kind of touched on before, where you said you have that failure in a tournament or whatever, and then how what do you about that, right? You go to practice and then you review it at practice. You're like, okay, what happened right there? So this goes out to all the tech nerds out there, the technician types. This is basic troubleshooting methodology. All right. When we have a problem, one of the things that we have to do in order to solve that problem is we have to be able to recreate or reproduce the problem. So when you have this kind of failure in a tournament, then you need to go to practice and you need to find a way to recreate that situation where you had failed in the tournament. You have to be able to reproduce the problem in order to find the solution for it. He was talking about the problem versus the solution. So for all the tech nerds out there, this is basic troubleshooting methodology, right? We got to go back, recreate the problem. If you can't recreate the problem, maybe it's just a one-off, maybe something just slipped through. But if it is a very real problem and you can reproduce it, then you can create a solution for that problem.
I think that's absolutely true for those technical issue problems. But let's go to the issue of somebody loses a tournament fight and their mind is on the last fight. Is that something you can recreate in a practice? Because the mental pressure is different in a tournament than it is in a practice. Maybe you'd have to try to do maybe a tournament at practice or some kind of introduce a mental pressure environment.
There is nothing like Crown.
Exactly.
You can't recreate that. I mean, you can do practice tournaments. Mm-hmm. They do the Pro tourney out in the West once a month. They've been doing it once a month for almost 30 years now. And that is a way that a mechanism they have. I think Bryce Byram down in Atlanta is doing the Cross and Lily tourney down there as well. So there are ways that you can recreate the tournament environment, and that's very important to be able to practice being in tournament. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's Crown is just, you can't cram for that test. Like you
Exactly. And
you
that's
can't recreate those situations.
the mental side is something that I've always been fascinated with. I mean, the technical is its thing, but I've seen fighters that are mildly technical but have got a very sharp mental game beat a very sharp technician, even a superior technician that does not have their mental side in place, or they're not as strong on the competitive, on the I need to perform when it matters, that aspect of it. So in those types of failures, now we're talking not about the physical technical failures, but more the mental preparation, the readiness, the attention, zanshin, if you want to call it that ready mind, that as you start to get deeper into the competitive fighting, it becomes an actual thing. And so maybe this would be a whole breakout topic we could do another episode on, that we didn't even predict, of, all right, now there's building the mental side of your fighting and the failures that go along with that, on top of just building the technical side that you would do at practices or on your own time.
I'd go so far as to say that those mental failures are much, much harder. Because
Definitely.
everything we've talked about here, if you think about the technical failures, if your mind isn't in that, I need to beat my head against the wall because I'm such a terrible person. If that's where your mind is at, you're not going to find the solutions to the physical ones.
That's correct.
Right? If your mind is okay, then you can find the physical ones. Well, if your mind is what you're fighting, and that's the tool you need to fix your mental issue, I need to get my car tires fixed, except they're all flat. So what am I supposed to do with that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, yeah, you need to find some other way around that, some other tools. I want to go back to Nessa. You said that's exactly what you had going on at Adult Swim, correct?
Yeah.
And it was bad in the morning. You said it was like, I need to bang my head against the wall because I don't need to be here. But you said by the end, you said by the end you got past that?
Kind of. Duchess Antigone set me up with a fighter and gave me some mental things to try. It was my last fight of the day, and gave me some mental things to try. She said, first, just do some sparring, and that wasn't working for me. That's not how my brain turns on or off or anything like that. And finally, she came up to me, it was she's like, okay, go at it. And then I was like, that was okay. And then she came up to me, he said mean things about me. And I was like, okay, well, now it's a different story. I don't think it's necessarily, it clicked my brain on, and then I started doing things right against him in a fight. Not necessarily to beat him, but to okay, now it's game on. But it's the mental stuff for me is really hard to overcome. I need a support system sometimes to do it. I know I have talked to Bronis a bunch. I've called a bunch of people and been like, Adult Swim fighting Duke Morgan. My husband saw me drop my shoulders or something, but after we were done fighting, he came up to me and said, hey, you were doing this. There were nights that couldn't do that today. And then he walked away. He saw me be defeated for a moment and knew the thing I needed. My very first tournament, I got one-shotted by everybody in my pool. Everybody. It might have been a different shot, but everybody one-shotted me. And I had to leave the room.
Too.
I had to go away. I couldn't be in the room. I couldn't be around other people. And that's not normal for me. And I was crying. And eventually I ended up in front of Duke Bronis, who was outside doing training. And I was just crying. And he said that crying was the showing that I cared about it. I cared enough about it to bring an emotion into play. And that meant a lot. So now at least I had the basis of, well, can't do worse than that tournament. Let's go to another one. And I did better. But that day at Adult Swim was just, there was a lot going on because we were also doing PEDSIC negotiations and things like that. So my brain was everywhere. It helps to have somebody who can help you focus sometimes because everything was a failure that day. And if I have one failure, more than likely it can snowball into this much bigger problem on an emotional, mental level that eventually it's well, this is not the day for me, I guess, and just go off and cry. So.
So outside support. So what I'm hearing there, when the mental is the failure, the solution becomes something you can't get. If you can't get it yourself, you need to go to an outside source and get it. That makes perfect sense. So your solution is seeking someone who understands, that you can talk with, and they can help you find the solution, and then you can have your success.
Yeah, because crying alone sucks.
I think this is an important lesson for anybody coaching, or anybody, even just as Bess points out, everybody needs a fighting buddy. If you're the fighting buddy for that moment, you're going to act as a coach to help your friend through what is obviously their struggle with failure. And I've done it, not because I've been teaching somebody. I just happen to be the one person there when that person's struggling, they're overwhelmed, they're frustrated, they're emotional. And I've been able to be there because I've been there myself, and know that sometimes you just have to listen and let them, do their thing. And even just a word or two of encouragement can change that around. And of course, I've also seen the clumsy way to handle is, well, you should have done this and you should have done that. And it's like, that sort of stuff does not help at all.
For some people. Some people need that technical help. Like this error came up. How do I fix?
Yeah. There's a time for that.
Yes.
When somebody's in the emotional meltdown, I've found that is not the time for that.
Yeah. It does not help in the moment.
Right. So, but that's an important coaching ability, to recognize what the right time is and to respond and add. Sometimes not even add, just sit there and listen. But if it does come to adding the right component that's needed to allow that person to grow. And that failure and the overwhelming emotional response can actually be a huge opportunity to turn that failure into the success. And I love Ragnavldr's language with that. Failure equals
solution.
The ingredient for success.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. When I think, this kind of gets a little bit back to victory conditions and setting things up to begin with. But when you go to something like Adult Swim, or you get to the pickups at Gulf Wars, or you get the pickups at Penzic, understand that every fight you have in those situations is simply an evaluation. And ideally, again, you're hopefully you're going to get an evaluation that will isolate those deficiencies and point those things out. I think it's important in those moments to again minimize your expectations, understanding that you're not necessarily going to the pickup field to wipe the field clean, with this a string of dead bodies behind you, in victory. Ideally you're going out there to find those deficiencies, to test out where you are and to see where you're at, and this is true of pickups, and I think it's also true in tournament as well. If you can approach every fighting experience you have with the expectation simply that you are going to that you're going to be able to isolate deficiencies, you're going to be able to find out what's wrong. Having that understanding, you can approach that with just, I am going to just execute the best fight that I have right now, and it's either good enough or it's not. And if it's not, that's fine, and we'll find out why, and then we'll get back to work on that, and we'll try to make those things better. But in order for us to, as trainers, in order for us to give you valid feedback on what you need to do as a fighter, I need to see the most accurate reflection of who you are as a fighter. And I can't do that when you're consumed with the worries about whether or not you're good enough or whether or not you're going to fail, right? I don't care how good you are. I don't care how good you're not. All I care about is that you want to be better. And in order to do that, I need to see who you really are, not who you want to show me you are, if that makes sense. And I think Gulf Wars, any pickup in, Adult Swim, any pickup environment, I think that helps kind of mitigate the feeling of failure, especially if you're seeking out that failure, right?
The way I treated that was because you talk about the pressures of fighting in tournaments, especially some of the bigger ones. I used both of things that you're talking about. One is when you're fighting in the tournament and we use the cliche, just do your best. That's the one place the cliche really fits. However good or however bad or however what you are, when that tournament starts, you will never be at that moment better than you are at that moment. Next time you'll be better, but right then you are who you are. So just be who you are and stop trying to fix it, change it, and try to do better. I've done everything I can. Tournament starting. Okay, now I'm going to do better. No, you're not. You're going to do who you are. And that's fine. That's great. That's exactly what you should do, because it also leads to the second level, which is what Sean's talking about, is clear evaluation of what you are. That's the big gift that I always got from tournaments is, and that goes to a second point, is evaluation. Everything for me, because I'm trying to become this perfect fighter, every fight is an evaluation. So a tournament, whether it's any of them, including crowns, they're all evaluations for me. I'm there to, that was one of the earliest things I learned along that line was the one beauty of crown. Everybody talks about being tough, and it is all those things, and there's a lot of pressure. But I'll tell you what, there's one thing that you can count on getting no matter who you are. And that's when you step in a crown list, that other guy is going to give you 100%. It's going to give you everything they can. So now's your chance to see what it's like to fight someone at your best when they're fighting their best, and to really be able to evaluate how good you really are. Because if you're doing pickups, there have been times where I fought people in pickups. I remember a few years ago fighting someone in pickups, and I just tore them to pieces. And then when they fought in the tournament, I had to fight really, really hard. It turns out when they do pickups, they fight at like 3/4 ability. Okay, well, that's their choice. That's fine. But it wasn't a real measure. When I got in the tournament, that's a real measure. So instead of focusing on the worry of those things, I use them as evaluations. That losing crown doesn't mean you'll never win crown. Losing crown has given you failures that you can find solutions for to get successes. So when you fight in the next crown, right? I always treat a crown as I'm going to do my best, because the better I do, the more chance I have at the next crown. That was what it was. I'm going to do my best so I can figure out what it is I need to do before the next crown. And then if you win, you win.
Yeah. Along the lines of what you're saying, the only time that I really feel like I've truly failed is when I haven't given my best fight. When I've gone out there and I've done something and I've I don't know that made a mistake is the right way to phrase it, but I haven't fought at my best potential, and that's when I truly feel like I failed. Any time other than that, I mean, I've lost in the finals of the last 2 crowns, and I've been in the finals of crown 4 times, and I've not won it. But I don't feel like I've failed in those tournaments by not having won those tournaments. I feel like I fail when I'm in a fight, and it doesn't matter what tournament it's in or something else, and I don't give my best fight that I could.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've learned something recently, or had it pointed out, and it clicked with me, and that was I feel like, I've always felt like I struggle really hard to hold on to the abilities I have. I'll have these days periodically where I'm able to get and I'm still working at it, but everything comes together, right? A recent one was I was doing so well against Bronis that at one point he literally lost track of where I was, and that never happens, right? Everything we'd been working on was perfect, and it made my mind said, this is awesome because I finally get it. Finally getting it right. The reality is, in the big picture, that was a best day. That's what that was. It was not a normal day. It was a best day. And one of the reasons I struggled so hard with failure was that was my bar. That was my normal. So what ends up happening is, unless I have a best day, which is normal, then they're all bad days. They're all failures, just to different degrees. That's all. So a real normal day was had failures in it, but not that many. And then there were bad days where they were just horrible, which happened too. So there's having acceptance of where you are in the grand scheme makes it easier to deal with failure because you can keep a perspective on the failure. So that, I think, is what has helped me to deal with the mental ones, is to put it all into the big spectrum, the big picture. Where am I in this? I just had a day that was perfect. That's fantastic. You should be thrilled that you were able to reach that, and that's what your best days are. But understand they're your best days. Those days where you have a few failures, those are your normal days. And then every now and then I have a day. I remember a few years ago where I went and I got my ass handed to me. And I had already been a royal peer, and I got beat by everyone on the heavy list. And then we did pickups, and I was getting beat again. And I thought, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to go fence. And I went over, and the fencers beat me up. I was like, I have no idea what's happening. So I took my stuff off, and that was the end of my fighting day. That was a bad day. That's a day where you accept it as, this was a bad day. There's nothing here for me to fix. It's just a bad day. And you don't, what it allowed me to do is not reach that point where I was like, screw it. On the way home, we're throwing all this crap in a dumpster and I'm taking up knitting. You know, this is just not going to happen. So perspective is, I think, perspective and acceptance of where you are in the big picture is a big tool to help the mental side of failure.
I know we're getting pretty close to the end here. I wanted to kind of address the question that Bess threw up there about expanding a little bit on victory conditions. We talked about it a little bit here, and I think it's pretty critical to understanding failures. I will say my personal definition of what victory conditions comes down to is what has to happen in order for you to consider your fighting experience for that day to have been a success. If your only measure of success is winning a tournament, if the only measure of success is winning Crown Tournament, you're going to be grossly disappointed a vast majority of the time. So it's a matter of like what has to happen in order for you to feel like your day was a success. And honestly, some days getting to fighter practice and being in armor at all is the victory.
Yes.
But when we're talking about failure, how to address it, what to do with failure, that really, it does. It comes down to victory conditions, and it's a matter of, you know, it's defining, you know, what success means to you, and that is a day by day process. That is a fight by fight process sometimes. And so that's what it means to me. So I just wanted to kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Yeah, we're getting kind of to the wrap-up time. I'd like to have maybe everybody go through and just give some of your wrap-up thoughts. Maybe we can do it in order with Nessa going first.
I would like to make some points still too. Anybody can help with pointing out failures and successes. I know that I have a great set of knights and dukes above me and with me here, and yet, like, I know an unbelt can help me with my problems. Anybody can help. If like, again, the support questions are a big thing, and like just communication is one of the biggest things we can do to help each other and all help each other grow in this sport. I am thankful for my failures. I should look for more successes, but it's a journey and we're all in it. And if like just the reminder of, hey, you did this really well. Hey. It's like the unbuilt thing. Like, this is how we get better. So thank you to everybody for always helping on the paths, no matter at what stage we are. And also, I'm pretty sure all these guys would listen to me if I said, hey, I saw this and I could, do you want some help? So it's every level helps every level, and I think it's the best thing. So that's my take.
Cool. Thank you. Guillaume.
Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope we shed some light on some perspective on the fact that we're all still dealing with failure. It is not unique to new fighters. It is not unique to unbelts. It is something that we face at all levels, and we can make ourselves available to help each other work through those things. And there's more to come in this series. I think this is a really good opportunity to sort of start things off and be able to take a look at things in a broad perspective. There's more that's going to be coming up from the channel on individual facets of dealing with failure and different ways of causes of failure and things like that. So there's a lot more to tune in for, and I think that it's going to be a really good topic to cover over a number of different episodes. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope that we were entertaining and enlightening.
Good, thank you. Ragnavldr, do you have a wrap-up thought or two?
Yeah, two. One is if your failures feel overwhelming, then they are, because you're probably looking at too many of them. So pick one. Sean had mentioned it earlier, but I think it's really vital, and that is bring it down. Even if it's as simple as, I can't hit. Well, then figure out what it is. And if it comes down to literally, I have to work on just my hand position, then that's what you do. You bring it down to a thing that you can fix. That is your victory condition. Did I get my hand the right place most of the time? That's your victory condition. Nothing else matters when you compare for that. And the last is to reiterate the little formula I stumbled on. Failure equals a new solution, which equals success. If you follow that path, then that's the path failure can go positively.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I'll just reiterate too. Thanks everybody for joining in tonight. Some of the really great comments. I loved how involved people were with the listening and kind of giving us some thumbs up and whatnot. So thank you for all of our guests. Nessa, Guillaume, Sean, Ragnavldr, thanks for coming on. Again, thank you, Sir Sadb, for doing the production behind the scenes. Again, this is such a huge topic. I feel like we've kind of only scratched the surface, and it is a very personal one to each of us. So just remember, everybody's been through it. Every fighter will go through it. If you're more advanced and somebody's beginning, remember what it was like when you were starting out and how much failure and frustration you were dealing with. So, we always try to show grace to one another and to be helpful, whether we're a coach or even just another person at practice. But failure's all around. But as Sean says, embrace the suck, use it as a process, and that will lead to your success. So again, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Look forward to the next one. And until then, take care and have fun fighting from Coach's Corner.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Night.